Welcome back to AI Diatribe. Today's episode is part 2 of a 3-part series. If you caught part 1, which was our last episode, you heard Angela Mathon, Matt Konwiser, and me discuss the Chief AI Officer revolution sweeping through businesses everywhere. But here's the thing. In the rush to adopt AI, are we losing sight of what really matters? Today, we're tackling the uncomfortable question of when AI helps versus when it hurts, complete with a story that'll make you think twice about replacing humans with algorithms. This is the reality check the AI world desperately needs. So let's dive in. So, my question for the both of you is, what are your thoughts? Do you think we're going to see a little bit of a shift between packaged product to fully customized product that's specific to the companies and the use cases they need, and maybe some of those develop into something a little bit more productized, and so a little bit more of a blend in the middle? How do you see this happening? Is artificial intelligence going to be all custom all the time at the get-go, or are we going to see some of these vendors come up with something a little bit more packaged, fast enough to have a material impact on how quickly and effectively companies are adopting AI? Angela, what are your thoughts first?
So I think there's probably a couple dimensions to that. I think one, it'll really depend, like I said, going back to the strategy of your business and where you need differentiation. I think then the second thing that's probably going to play out is there's going to be a question of in-house dynamics, which is what do I need to happen in-house? What can I ensure that is within my shop because it adds value in a particular way versus what am I okay to sort of, outsource and create a bit of a vendor dynamic. So I think that'll play into it, especially cost. But I think if I'm trying to understand also from the security perspective, I think as we're learning more and as companies are figuring out more how to leverage AI within a business process, I think those questions are going to raise a lot of dynamics around security, right, in particular. And so I think as we're trying to understand a little bit of like what these security dynamics are, the responsible AI component becomes even more important. Like you really need to understand some of these black box dynamics. I think you're going to then start to see potentially a shift where there's going to be a need to sort of revisit the sort of on-prem cloud dynamic, because some of the ways in which you're going to be playing or testing this is going to require you to just to rethink quite a few things in your AI stack. So I do think that at some point, as companies get a bit more mature, they're going to start to recognize that if I am trying to scale AI within my business processes and I need a certain predictable outcome, which is not always the case when you're kind of leveraging these technologies, they're going to force that predictability. And so therefore, they're going to have to force that by really rethinking their strategy internally. So I think it's going to be one of those things that's, business strategy dependent, but I think fair game. Like I would totally understand why a company would turn around and say, we're going to do this a little bit differently. So this whole, cloud, vendor model where we're sort of like having to buy everything. It comes to my business operations, we're going to have to do this slightly different. We're going to have to revisit this. So I could totally see that second part of the story playing out.
Matt, your thoughts?
Yeah, so actually Angela and I were talking about this a little bit via email yesterday. I had posted a visual on LinkedIn over the weekend that was originally posted by Ben Lee. I reshared it with some of my thoughts on it, but this visual shows all of these apps, ServiceNow and Salesforce and Zoom and RingCentral and Workday and everything else basically going away. And this new structure just being, pick your major commercial model here and then insert your logo above it and then just put it in your cloud space and you're done. And I think that in the same way that we saw some of these companies reverse course on their strategies, we saw companies that were letting go lots of employees and then realizing, well, actually, we need to hire a lot of those back because things weren't quite going the way we wanted. I think the same thing's happening, right? It's what you can do is not necessarily what you should do, which is not necessarily what you will do. I could build an agentic system that could largely replace almost everything that I use every day, all the tooling and all the information sources. I don't want to, because there's an easy button and then there's a let's not be silly about this button. And replacing everything with AI is the let's not be silly about this button. Using AI to help you do your job is the easy button. So we're still kind of reeling back from the over-rotation that's happened because of, hey, we could do all this really cool stuff. But wait a minute, though. Is that really what the company is about? Is that what the consumers are looking for? Is that the best thing for us to do? And I think for small businesses, it's a really easy way to start up. Because, if you think about it, if I have an entire team of AI agents working for me, I don't need an LLC. I don't need workers' comp. I don't need to create a multiple person environment. I don't need HR. I don't need to worry about, filing taxes for all these different employees or handing out 1099s because I don't have to pay any of them. At least not yet. I mean, when the government figures out how to tax agents as humans, then we're all in trouble, and they will at some point, I guarantee it. But until we get to that point, it's very effective and easy to spin up a multi-person company using agents to do your job. But to walk back human jobs into agent roles is a whole different beast. And I think the other thing that we have to remember is all of this is designed to sell stuff or interact with human beings, not other agents, not other AI. And there's still a preference to do that. So I think that consolidation is organic. I think with every new technology, you're going to see old ones go away. I worked for a telecom provider, and I remember when we merged with a data provider, there was this huge, almost religious discussion over whether telecom or data networking would win based on which one was more complex to build and support and how it would roll out and which one was more important. At the time, telephones were more important than the internet because business was conducted over the phone by calling people, by reaching out to people, and the internet was a fad. And how things have changed. And I think we're going to see the same thing, right? You've got all of these apps and all these domains and businesses that are discrete and isolated, and then you've got AI that can either replace or unify all of them. There's going to be that over-rotation, and then there's going to be an equilibrium that's going to get settled in the middle. But the thing I point out as well, and what I wrote on LinkedIn, all these providers that this graph suggests will disappear are not just UXs. They're also back-end data warehouses and data providers and data marts. So you can't just choose to eliminate them. Like if a company eliminates Salesforce, you're losing all of your CRM, all of your leads, all of your opportunity management, all of your pipeline management, all of your visibility. So maybe you take it and stick it behind a bunch of APIs and then front end it with a generative model. But it would be nearly impossible to just remove all of that infrastructure and all of that information and all of that business critical data sets and just simply wipe it out and say, oh, we'll just drop an agent in here. I don't know. I'm a skeptic, but
yeah, and I think just even to build on that. So if I think about my own sort of consultancy right now, so I've built out quite a few sort of proprietary models for how I work with my clients, for example. And one of the questions is, do you offer that as a self-service solution, right? So right now I use them and I've built it in a particular way and I know how it works. But do you replace me and say, okay, well, you no longer have to necessarily just engage with Angela here. I'll give you this sort of customized LLM and you can engage with it. You can feed it your data and then you can solve a problem. And maybe because of the clients that I'm dealing with who are largely trying to solve people-related issues, they're like, I don't want to talk to an agent. I'm hiring you. Like I'm trying to collaborate with you. And the reality is, yes, I can do it, but the response is at the moment is, but you should not do it because that's not what's really interesting for us. So I think it just goes back to, really trying to understand the sort of pain point you're solving for. And I don't think the answer is always eliminating people and just replacing it with an agent or some sort of, automated solution just because you can. I think it's really figuring out where is their value? Where is there a value between having a person who's in chair who can kind of solve for a thing versus where is there value in saying that's actually low value work? That's actually just friction, and therefore that's really where we want to get an automated solution in place or some sort of agentic solution. So I do think there's this bit of a dance that has to be had, and I think when companies go a bit too quick to go, oh right, great, I can just get rid of a bunch of people because people management is hard and complicated, and then sort of replace it with like an agentic solution. It's almost like you're missing the point, right? So you're in the business of creating value in some form. You need to be really clear on what that value is and what that.
And
looks
I'll
like.
actually add to that, Angela, in a personal story over this weekend. So we had a ton of heavy rain last week, which is not entirely unusual, but the volume of it and the time frame was. And there was some damage to my house. And on Saturday, I called a couple places to get estimates. And one place I called, they didn't answer. It was like an automated recording, and I hung up. I didn't even leave a message. And I got a text back saying, if you'd like to talk to us, here's a link, fill out this form online. I didn't do it. It was great that they got back to me and gave me an interaction, but that's not what I'm looking for. The other two places I called, They called me back the same day. They came out on a Sunday, even though they weren't open on Sundays, to do an estimate. And one of them was willing to do it the next day. And so I had the work done yesterday and everything was done. It was perfect. But the other cool thing was the guy said, look, this is such a small project. We usually have a minimum and you're well under that. So I'm just going to charge you the actual cost and not our minimum because I'm going to rip you off if I do it any other way. So he showed up and then he gave me a bottle of Do Epic Shit Cabernet at the end of it, wrapped up in cellophane with a ribbon to thank me for the business. And I'm thinking, if that was an AI agent, count the ways that would have never happened. Right. And it's there's so many of them. And, you know, there's a personal relationship that is now constructed between me and this individual who I will absolutely use again. Hopefully I'll never need to use him again. But if I ever do, I will call him back. And all of the interactions that happened from when I first made phone calls to when they showed up to do the work, none of that would have happened, right? Because the AI agent's rules would have said, we don't work on Sundays, we don't do quotes on Sundays, we don't go below the minimum, we can't schedule without contracts, we won't take it to, you know, and by the way, they didn't even take a deposit on Sunday. They didn't take $1 from me until the work was completely finished. They gave me the wine, I gave them the money, and job complete, everybody was happy. None of these things can happen with an AI because you're not building a personal relationship with another human being that you get a read on and decide you can trust or not trust. And I think that that's also part of the clawback from the over-rotation is humans want to work with humans, and AI should just help ease the process, not replace it. And, you know, I think that HR is going to have a critically important role in this moving forward. So I couldn't agree more with everything you said, and I just wanted to add that story to it.
That is one heck of a interesting story, and I sure hope you're planning on sharing that wine at some point.
I will send it to you.
Boy, okay. Anyway, so this is a really interesting thing. The backlash, right? The overcorrection. Hey, we're going to go all the way to AI, and we're going to try and find that middle ground. How pivotal is the role of artificial general intelligence and the evolution into the AGI phase going to play there? Because in theory, an AGI entity is going to be able to have that empathy, is going to have that type of flexibility, is going to be a little bit more human. We're kind of in this really interesting phase of what are we going to allow AGI to do and what are we not going to allow? Do you think that's going to have an effect on this over-rotation compensation? Angela, what are your thoughts?
You know, so I don't know. I really struggle with the AGI, ASI hype. I mean, I just think, I don't know, high context type of dynamics. I don't know. I just think when I look at sort of the human intelligence, when I really think about sort of what that is, I'm not even sure humans have really grasped fully kind of human intelligence. And so the idea that we can then sort of recreate versions of it when we haven't actually understood our own, I just feel like it just feels silly. So I think in my mind, it's a lot of, again, that's the marketing play in my mind. This idea that an agent could have ever, if I take Matt's story, could have ever sort of been replaced and kind of understood all those dynamics and had the ability to understand how to show up to regardless. I just think we're just nowhere near that. So I don't know. I'm not a fan of that. I think what AI should be and probably by design needs to get to is making it easier to be more human. So making it easier for humans to sort of show up to other humans and engage better. I think a lot of times we're just exhausted having to carry so much admin and having to process so many data components, et cetera, that we're just not showing up to our best. And I think for me, the game should always be around getting humans to be better at displaying human intelligence as opposed to over relying on artificial versions of it. I don't know. That's my view without being overly philosophical, but I'm not into the whole AGI. I just think it's a lot of really, really well orchestrated marketing.
Matt, do you agree with her?
I do, and I will open my comments with a quote from a movie and a book, by the way.
Is this a George Lucas movie?
No, it's not. I'll read the quote and see if you can tell me what it's from. It'll give it away in the first line if you get the reference. I created the oasis because I never felt at home in the real world. I don't know how to connect with the people there. I was afraid for all of my life right up until I knew it was ending. That was when I realized, as terrifying and as painful as reality can be, it's also the only place where you can find true happiness because reality is real. Do you know what that's from? No?
I don't, but I want to watch it now.
It's from a book and a movie called Ready Player One. And if you are into 80s pop culture or an understanding of what could happen in the future, that book or that movie is absolutely phenomenal. although there's a lot of people that would say that the movie didn't do the book justice, as most people would, but it's still a great watch or a great read either way. They're coming out with a sequel soon, I think, as well. The point there from an AGI perspective is that I think we shouldn't care about AGI as much as we should care about what's happening to humans because of AI, right? Because AI is giving people an opportunity to recess further into their own dark corners because they can use agents to come up with ways to interact, right? A la Cyrano de Bergerac or the movie Roxanne, or, insert things here, right? Tell me what to say to this person. To coming up with who should be suggested as a potential dating candidate for another person, right? Because that's all driven by AI algorithms. When you feed all of that into something that has general intelligence, like AGI might, it can create a superposition in front of humans that just kind of demote the importance of a human's decision-making or a human's involvement with other humans. And I think we have to be very careful about that. But I'm also grounded by the fact that, and this is going off the record and off the rails a little bit, to be honest. Although I think Jan LeCun would agree with me. The best AGI could ever do is a facsimile to human emotion, right? It will never be able to have human emotion. It just may be getting really close to expressing what a human would be able to express in a certain situation without the experience, the memories, the personal experience, the understanding of the impact when you say something to somebody else, having to live with that and learn from that if you make a mistake or if you have to do something that's less favorable to somebody else's outcomes but don't have a choice. All of these things are still uniquely human. So I think AGI is going to get here. Maybe it's going to get here sooner than people are predicting. But I also think that, or at least I hope that, the governance and ethics around it will frame it to use its capabilities from a business process perspective exclusively that doesn't directly negatively impact humans, but helps them. So, for example, equipping robotic intelligence with AGI reasoning and send them into hazardous zones to look at nuclear fallout or hazardous materials or things like that, where you don't have to have an operator even controlling it. You just say, your job is to make this safe for humans, now go, and it will figure out how to do that, right? Same thing from a business process perspective in non-hazardous environments. I think that as long as humans remember that reality is the only thing that's real, going back to James Halliday's quote from Ready Player One, and understanding we can learn from his experience in the book, which is don't hide behind it. Don't invent virtual realities and live in virtual worlds because the real world is too difficult to live in. Do it as an augmentation to yourself, and then make sure that you know what AGI is and what place it has as a function of that, even if it can be difficult and ugly and horrible and painful in the real world. It's still better to be there and then use AGI to help you do the things that you legitimately need help with, and not just things that make it easier for you to live in a corner. And apologies if I'm offending people, because obviously there's a lot of benefit to using AI for a lot of people, especially those with neurodiversities. But I'm talking overall, general population. Don't use it as a mask. Don't use it to hide behind, and understand that it's still just a facsimile of human emotion and not, a true human analog. So that's, I've probably just overstepped, and I'll get fired from this and from IBM, but man, I'm very passionate about this one.
I mean, I think there's countries that might even sort of have challenges. I mean, I think if you look at kind of the Japanese society and how they create these sort of like barriers, and, human connection in some spaces are just, that's what they're afraid of, right? They sort of can't handle it. I thought about Meta as you were talking, in the metaverse, and I just thought to myself, like, there's just some pockets of our sort of world that are just sort of afraid of human connection. And so they are clinging to this sort of AGI dynamic because they just sort of can reinvent themselves I guess reality is too difficult, but I like that idea of just sort of the muscle to develop is sort of how to be in the real world and how to appreciate the value of that, leveraging AI where it makes sense. And so some of the examples that you provided, like that makes perfect sense to me. Oh, there's a very hazardous situation, probably not safe to send humans, but we need to learn and discover it. That's probably the right opportunity to say, yeah, we should probably explore how we leverage robotics and AGI together, right? But to just sort of take everyday tasks and things that are really sort of geared towards the human experience and how it feels to be human. I just think that's just the silliest way of leveraging a very expensive
Well, it's so
technology.
interesting because the whole hiding behind technology phenomenon is not new in humanity, for crying out loud. Costumes have been used for years and years. I don't know about you, but The Wizard of Oz wasn't based on, just conjecture. People will actually do what they can to fool other people into thinking that they are more big and powerful and amazing than they really are. And we know this from when the internet came about. The BBS bully became a phenomenon pretty darn quick, right? We still have a lot of people that are, they're, what do we call them? Cyber tough guys or behind the keyboard tough guys? I don't know. There's a variety of different things. Artificial intelligence is just augmenting that and making that a little bit more easy, maybe a little harder to identify, make it so that people can feel a little bit more comfortable being themselves because the shield that they're hiding behind is a little bit more believable and a little bit more realistic now. So these are very, very valid points. This is really going to be a challenge, quite frankly, for if we bring this back and we draw this back to a business type discussion and how artificial intelligence is going to be affected in a business environment, human resources is going to have their hands full moving forward as it relates to how AI makes people present themselves, work. Are they actually in their chair doing their job, or is it an agent? What is actually happening here? By the way, as a quick aside, before we dive into that, Angela, you had previously, when we were talking about this, raised the point that 100 million salaries for software development in the AI space, $100 million a year. And Laszlo Bock has said, and is on record as saying, that that's a bargain. So what do you think he means by that specifically?
I think what he's alluding to is just, the way in which you can create industries with AI, right? So if you just think about kind of the sort of history of AI and how it kind of evolved, right? Mad professor looking for funding, comes up with a cool name. I mean, look at us now, right? So I think what he's alluding to is this idea that if you get the right engineers to come in, they create new markets because they create products, they create things that, individuals who kind of aren't necessarily getting under the hood and getting into the details of will just get eluded by. So that's a hype cycle. So I think what he's alluding to is this idea that, you get the right talent in the door. And because a lot of people aren't necessarily understanding the complexities and the realities of AI, you can still create new markets and therefore the $100 million salary that seems expensive is not really expensive if that person's going to now create $1 billion industry. And I think that's what a lot of people are looking at. I think I was looking at sort of the YC, they that they had their intake recently, and literally they're basically looking for the next $1 billion industry that you can leverage with AI. And I just think that's the reality of the world that we're operating in. It's just we know that there's someone sitting in a room somewhere that's going to create some $1 billion company leveraging AI technology. So I think he's alluding to
Matt,
that.
this kind of dovetails into our previous conversation quite well. And your current narrative is to the importance of the human being or human in the loop in a variety of different processes. But in a previous episode, you and I had a conversation talking about the 3 C's. Now, this is a adjacent thing. This isn't a standard thing, but I see 3 different things that start with a C as becoming more valuable as we move forward. 1 is communication. 2 is creativity, and 3 is critical thinking. And so what Angela is talking about as it relates to this is what people are going to find valuable, the ability to be creative and find new industries, find new markets, find new ways in which technology can be utilized. That kind of follows the same argument thread, doesn't it, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does. The creativity and critical thinking is essential, and I think it will continue to be. The interesting thing is, by the way, and I will say this about these. By the way, there was somebody from Australia, I think, that turned down a 9-figure salary recently. Did you see that? It was over $1 billion in total compensation. Now that was, including expected stock appreciation and other things. But the total value of the package was something like over $1 billion that this guy had turned down. And I was thinking about, first of all, like if I took that job, even if I just failed miserably at it and they fired me after 6 months, I could still retire. So that had occurred to me as well. Like, if you want to take a shot on somebody, I'll happily, raise my hand for that kind of a role if the other guy turned it down. But, they don't really talk about what's required for those roles, right? And, what is the nature of the people that they're going after? Because they're just saying, oh, we're hiring AI people for $100 million salaries. Well, what exactly is that? Like, are these mathematicians? Are these people that are building the actual models? Are they just big brain thinkers that are looking at the future? Who are they? And what is their profile? And what is their skill set? I remember, I think it was probably 2.5 years ago, they were saying that people were paying prompt engineers $400,000 a year, starting salaries of over 200, just to figure out how to talk to a large language model to get it to do something relevant for a business. And, we've gone from that to these supermassive companies offering supermassive salaries to hire people. And I think that the answer is that the people that they're going after are the ones that have those 3 C's, Jason, is they're the ones that have the foundations to understand the power of these models and have the math backgrounds to code them and build the ways they will tokenize and parameter and apply all the weights. But they also have critical thinking and creativity to figure out what could come next from all of this. And my concern and the thing I think about is those few people are going to create the models that dictate the thought of millions. And so I think it's important, going back to the previous answer with the quote from Ready Player One, that we maintain our grasp on reality, that we also need to make sure that we own our own individuality and creativity as we go further into these AI models, because if we don't, it's going to be too easy to surrender it, right? It's way easier to just say, oh, just do this for me, right? And it'll do it. And you might even look at it and be like, oh, it's not how I was thinking about it, but it's good enough. I'll take it, right? How many times have you challenged a model and said, no, that's not what I want. Yeah, that's nice, but it's not me. It's not what I'm looking for. Give me something else, and then put in the effort to get what you want out of it instead of just getting what's good enough. And that's, I don't know, too many topics, but yeah.
And I would just add that I think a lot of what's also probably happening is that some of these companies know the limitations of AI, and they know that the mass market probably hasn't caught on to that. And so some of the reasons why they might also be looking for really high caliber talent is to help them push and solve for that before everyone becomes aware of it. So I see some of that chipping at sort of different dynamics, in other places, in terms of people really testing the limitations of the model and saying, hey, there's some actual factual issues here. The math only goes so far. And I think what they're trying to do now is, before the mass market gets to a point where, if you're implementing this in a business environment and it has to be on all the time, and it has to operate in particularly all the time, that's when you start to discover limitations. And so I think some of the need to get certain talent in play is to kind of figure that out before everyone else does. It's almost like kind of like you're on a timeline a little bit. So I think some of that is probably at play as well, because, once you start telling companies that this is safe for use in a business operation, and then if there's an actual issue with itself, we can actually go back and show where there's an issue, you're going to get into a very interesting legal dynamic. So I suspect some of that is around the realization of this isn't actually vetted or tested for the things that we're actually marketing it as. And so I think some of that could just be defensive play as well.
You talk about models kind of going off the chain and doing crazy things, and we should turn this back towards the HR specific discussion, because this is a really interesting aspect of that, right? We all know that AI is very much in an augmentative role right now, and it certainly is growing in capability, and as it approaches that seemingly AGI level that we've talked about, maybe its capabilities get to be a little bit more and a little bit more. But now, where does the human being end as far as responsibility is concerned, and where does AI begin? And is it because we can see how the human is using AI and the effect that it has? Is the human responsible for what the model does, what the model says? Is the human responsible for the way in which they use AI? Are we talking about a loaded gun, and so the person that should be in trouble is the person holding the gun versus the gun manufacturer? This is a real interesting landmine to start trying to go and walk through from a thought perspective. And so, Angela, from an HR perspective, because that is your province and that is the area that you work in very heavily, where do you see this going? And that's where we'll end this one. Can't leave without a cliffhanger, right? Be sure to watch out for our next episode where I continue my discussion with Angela and Matt. You will not want to miss out on that one. As always, if you liked what you heard and saw and want to be notified when AI Diatribe comes out with new content, be sure to like and subscribe and follow and all of the other things you can do on the various channels, of which we have a presence on pretty much all of them. And if you want to contact me about anything from speaking engagements to AI guidance, reach out via email to contact@aidiatribe.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time for part 3.